And now time for our final main session, and we'll turn our focus to another of the areas Jim Fitterling stressed in his keynote as being absolutely crucial to the survival of the industry: diversity and inclusion. This session was organized by the EPCA Talents of Today, Leaders of Tomorrow committee, and many will recall back in 2015, EPCA did its first gender D&I survey of 20 companies, and this year they decided it was time to renew the exercise, and I see Berlin is connecting again. So welcome back, Karine, and I can hand over to you, my dear.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Some sort of a gremlin in the system there today. Doesn't that always happen on the last day? It's just incredible. I can't believe it. Anyway, the first phase, I think you were basically talking about the fact that back in 2015, the EPCA did its first gender D&I survey of 20 companies. This year, they decided that it was time to renew the exercise. And the first phase of this exercise was to repeat the survey this year to see actually what had changed with those companies and to see if progress had been made. Well, a second phase will be a survey of all EPCA members. So this is, in effect, a heads up to all of you out there that the fine-tuned survey is coming this fall. So do stay tuned, and we're hoping for a great response there. Well, as a warm-up for this session, we're going to do something new. We've got a mini survey that we've put into the chat box. And so I would like to invite you to take a look at those now. I think we've got 3 questions in there, and we will give you a little second here to answer them. And we'll be bringing the results up during our ensuing discussion. But of course, key to this exercise is to understand and hear what came out of the survey update that happened in 2021. And for that, I would like to give the floor to Chantal Laubert. She's an associate partner at McKinsey and a D&I expert, and she's the founder of the Women in Chemicals Roundtable, actually, and she's going to be here. She is here to present the 2021 results of this EPCA D&I study. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to Chantal. Hopefully she's with me on screen here, and I can give her the floor and she can take it away.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, Karen. Much appreciated. Yeah, I'm very humbled to present today the results of the 2021 survey of the EPCA. And I don't know if we can have it on screen here. Yeah, perfect. Exactly. As Karen mentioned, the EPCA has rerun its survey from 2015. And I'd like to share, before we go into details, actually a bit of context on why this is important. Of course, as you all know, and maybe we can see it on the next page, diversity and inclusion is important just because of fairness reasons. It's also important because of access to talent. 50% of the talent available is actually female, so that we shouldn't miss out. But there's also business case. So if you look at the companies who have more diversity in the top quartile, they actually perform 25% more likely in also the top financial performance. And if you spread this further to not only have gender diversity, but also ethnicity and other diversity factors, the likelihood becomes even 36%. So we shouldn't act just because out of fairness reasons, but really this is a business case. And what we also hear from everyone in the industry is that it more and more not only becomes a diversity topic, but it is actually an inclusion topic. So we are hiring diverse talent, but we also need to make them successful. On the next page, you can actually see some data before we go into the report. The good news is we have seen quite some improvement in the chemical industry in supervisory board. Particularly driven by also some regulations, but really by active moves of chemical companies. We have not yet seen this improvement in executive committees. So that is something we still need to work on. So coming now to the survey results of this year. And what you can see here is always on the top, the 2021 results, and on the bottom, the 2015 results. So while we unfortunately in the average of the chemical companies do not see here an improvement of the female share, we do see, and it's a 24%, but we do see in the companies who actually have the data and break female share down in blue and white color, we do see an improvement of 4 to 5%. So there has actually been improvement in the surveyed companies. And we have more good news. So what you can see here is that actually tracking and measurement of where we are has improved quite a lot. From the companies surveyed, there has been a lot of improvement both in the organization management, organizational setup. So where do we actually have tracked in manager level, country and division level, and even down to every employee, we are tracking gender-related data more thoroughly. On the right is that we also increase the tracking in the recruiting process. So it's not only the hires we are tracking right now, but also already who do we invite for interviews, who is the acceptance rate, and so on. So we get much more clarity on where in the funnel we lose female talent. What you can see here is interesting because most chemical companies in the survey, and I think that also reflects from what we learned from the chemical industry, is they have diversity and inclusion as a top 10 priority on their top management agenda. So that's 3/4 of all chemical companies. And the remaining quarter also has it on top of their agenda, not just in the top 10. What we do see, though, is that only 57% have actually a target related to that. So while it's on top management agenda, only a little more than a half have targets against it. And these targets can actually be still a bit more specific. We hear a lot of qualitative insights that we want to improve diversity and inclusion. There are also targets for top management, percentages of female share, but it's not yet holistic and cascaded down in the organization. And as mentioned before, if you go to the next page, that must be, can you go one back? Sorry, yes. What we do see is, as mentioned, we see that people in the hiring process are much more aware, chemical companies. What we still see a need to work on is making diverse talents which come into chemical companies more successful. While we do see here quite a lot of work has happened already on creating fairness, on creating meaning, mentorship to chemical companies, we still see quite some room for improvement in creating a belonging and esteem, basically, providing acceptance and also authenticity to be their true selves, which makes every individual successful. If you go to the next, yeah, exactly. We have also, the survey showed clearly that there are basically 3 major career opportunities which will advance careers. And that is international assignments, leading key strategic projects, and experience in multiple departments and functions. What we then have found out is that in the survey, it says that only roughly 50% of the companies ensure that these career critical assignments are made available to all diverse talents. And that being talents on flexible assignments, or in general, just out of perception that these talents might not want these kind of assignments. And to support these assignments and the critical career steps even further, we actually also looked at mentorship and sponsorship. So while the majority of chemical companies surveyed have an outspoken program on mentorship and connecting female talent also with senior leaders to provide advice, what is still lacking is the sponsorship opportunities of people in higher position taking risks to providing specific opportunities to female talent to advance in their careers. Another point which the survey surfaced is that while diversity and inclusion is on top of the management agenda, and of course also on top of the agenda of HR, there are still there's something missing when cascading down the organization, and the further down into the organization you go, the least of a priority it is. And that leads to exactly the effect we shown before, that there are less opportunities along the whole career funnel of chemical companies. So what does it all mean? Research shows that there are a few critical steps you need to take to make change happen and to make diverse talents included. You need a commitment, which most of you have. Then you for sure need the transparency and tracking, which we've discussed. But then it's also really critical to recruit the talent, retain them, and get them promoted. And this is mainly enabled by two things. Creating flexible programs so that females can assess to their needs, go on flexible programs, either because they care for elderlies or for kids. And B, and that has turned out to be very important, make the different leadership styles, the different personalities, then maybe in your existing leadership, inclusive, heard, and make use actually of the different styles and advantages that come with it. And to summarize and reflect on what we've learned here from the 2021 EPCA survey is that the chemical industry has already done great in CEO commitment, in training and coaching, and in providing flexible options. It's really a step ahead even of some other industries. We have seen over the last 6 years a major step up in transparency and tracking and in mentorship. Where we do see still quite some improvement is creating an inclusive environment, creating sponsorship for providing opportunities to females, and cascading down in the organization. That was a brief summary, and I'll hand over to Karin again.
Thank you very much, Chantal, and for that overview of your findings. There's been some very good progress made there, and I'm going to get you to stay with us, obviously, for the question period, because I think possibly 1 or 2 questions will come to you. So thanks for staying on the line. And I can introduce our speakers who are going to join us for this panel discussion, this final main session that we have for today. Ingrid Nettestad is Vice President of HR at Odefjell. That's a company specializing in worldwide shipping and storage of chemicals. She's connecting with us from Oslo today. I think that's actually Jeanne-Marie that I see there, but we're getting to her next. Jeanne-Marie Baumann is Chief Talent and Diversity Officer at LyondellBasell, and she's joining us from Houston, Texas. Welcome to you, Jeanne-Marie. Hopefully we can get Ingrid on the screen here with us. There she is. Hello.
Hello.
Nice to see you. And last but not least is Hernan Rhein, who is the Global Director of Human Resources at Vopak, a company we heard from yesterday, the CEO. And so Hernan is actually joining us from Rotterdam today, although he's been all over the world with Vopak. Welcome to you, Hernan.
Hello.
And thanks to all of you for joining. Now, once again, we have a really terrific mix on this panel with a major ship owner, a tank terminal operator, and one of the largest plastics, chemical, and refining companies in the world. And so what I'd like to do is start off by getting your responses just off the cuff to those survey results, because there has been, as we've seen, tangible progress since 2015 on things like transparency, tracking, and mentorship. More CEOs are on board, which is very good news, and companies are offering more training programs and flexible working conditions. So this is boding very well, obviously, for the gender issue. And yet we know that inclusive cultures and behaviors are still lacking across the industry in many areas, and gender equality is still an issue. Ingrid, you've talked to me about that. So how do things stand with you, for instance, at Odefjell? Does this evolution over the past 6 years that we've seen here in this study reflect the path that your company has taken at all?
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. And yes, it does. All in all, the survey results and development from the last survey are recognizable and point to issues that are relevant to us and that we are working on, such as the cascading piece that was just mentioned. We are facing major changes, all of us, with the green shift and digitization, and we believe that increased diversity will improve our ability to manage these challenges and to innovate and to stay relevant. And to do so, we need to add to our very strong team and recruit the best heads To succeed with this, we need to cast a wide net and recruit from the full population. And back to the survey results, we also need to work intentionally to ensure an organizational culture where an increasingly diverse employee population feels like they belong. At Odfjell, we link our DE&I efforts to our sustainability work and the S and ESG, and we see it as key to develop a workforce that is inclusive to the survey results and will retain and attract tomorrow's talent. Of course, we view diversity as more than gender. It also encompasses age, nationality, experience, diversity of thought, and so forth. At this point, we've set a specific target related to gender diversity in our onshore shipping organization, with an ambitious long-term target to reach and improve gender balance at all levels. We have an imbalance today and realize that we have a long way to go to reach our objective. We don't have all the answers for how to get there, but we are thoughtful, systematic, and intentional in our work, from branding through recruitment and development. We believe that this will bring results over time, and that will drive belonging and equity. We need to make micro decisions in our day-to-day work to drive progress together, and we need to think bigger than at company level. And on that note, it's very valuable to be here and discuss this topic together. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ingjerd, for that overview of what's going on. We'll get back, obviously, to the actions that your company has taken in just a moment. But I want to move on to Jeanne-Marie, because Ingjerd mentioned DE&I, so actually not just D&I, but adding an E for equality in there, diversity, equality, and inclusion. And I know that that is included in your company's mandate, Jeanne-Marie. You joined Able-Bodied, I think it was 2 years ago, and in a newly created senior level position that was responsible for this, for DEI. So what is your take on these results?
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's wonderful to be on the panel with all the guests here. Yes, we have a very ambitious vision that we have really set fairly recently in the last couple of years. And our ambition is to embed DEI as deeply into our company culture as safety is today, and to do that level of culture change. It requires a very systemic and holistic approach. And to your point there, we have recognized that focusing on the diversity side, which is what we think about as representation, how many women do we have in our organization, in our leadership levels, for example, but to think more broadly, to think about our inclusion efforts and our equity efforts, equity being fairness, inclusion being, ensuring that all of our employees have a very strong sense of belonging to the organization and feel like they have the opportunity to thrive and advance. And so we have really rechartered our focus into those three pillars for that reason. And to the point of the survey, very interesting findings and very, very familiar. We have seen really good progress inside our organization around increased commitment from our leadership at all levels, at our board level, at our senior and executive level, for DEI. We have added, as you mentioned, not only my role, but a dedicated DEI team. And we have formed a 17-member DEI leadership council that is representative of our global leaders that report into our CEO, who are actively understanding our needs, helping us develop multi-year strategies, and then more importantly, standing up and activating our programs to support that. So inclusion is really our priority especially for the short term, because we feel that we need to make sure that our culture, our work environment is supportive. So as we attract and develop and advance diverse talent in our organization, they feel that strong inclusion inside.
Thanks very much. Very clear, obviously, by all of that LyondellBasell is really, really pumping some resources into this area of its activities. Hanan, over to you. What about Vopak? How do things look from where you stand, and what issues are you perhaps currently working on?
Yeah, I mean, I think I concur with both of my colleagues on what they mentioned. think that to add, we need to put our money where our mouth is. So at the end, measuring progress, it's an important part of us making sure that we are taking the right steps. So I think that all of us are working towards some ambitious targets that are important to mobilize the organization towards it. I think that when we started to do that, we started to see, I would say, a good increase in the numbers. And at the end, that's what I would say increase the credibility with our current employees and with our candidates. We need to work in the entire, I would say, employee experience, okay, to make sure that when people come to the interviews, they can be told the right story and that they see the right faces also there, that when they join us and they go to one of our terminals, the PPE, that the personal protective equipment that we give them, it fits to their needs, to their gender, or to whatever other needs they might have, that there are acceptable and nice changing rooms to go there, that we have policies in place, from teleworking to paternal leaves that suit different styles and needs, that management is trained, because at the end, as was mentioned, this is a cultural change, and inclusion requires a lot of relearning from all of us. We all, I think, are working on unconscious bias training. So I think that it's all across the employee experience where we need to work. I think that what is important when looking at the survey that was shared is that COVID definitely had, I think, a negative impact, or at least has slowed down the progress of creating a more gender balanced workplace, because it has had a higher toll over the female employees. And yeah, I mean, that has been a missed opportunity, and we need to see how to catch up now.
Okay, thanks very much for that initial overview of what you're doing there at Vopak. And we're going to go to our first poll question, and we asked our audience to name the major challenges for D&I in the chemical industry, and that's the chemical industry in general. So let's just see if we can have a look at those results. Let's see if we can pull those up here. In one or two words, what do you think is the major challenge with D&I in the chemical industry? And we had a couple of answers there. Break traditional ways, space for women, accept it as needed, same chance at top management roles, not yet given, and I do not see any challenge if you accept the gender equality from top to bottom. Have we had any participation in that? While we're waiting for that result to come up, I'm gonna come back to you, Hanan, because the idea, we always talk about this business case for diversity and inclusion, and Chantal mentioned that there is a clear business case. McKinsey's results are certainly seeming to make one, but when we spoke, actually, you weren't so convinced that there is one, and had a bit of a provocative approach. And I'd like to just bring that in, because I'm sure there are many people who are maybe experiencing the same thing. Tell us a bit more about your observations and what's the driving factor, for D&I. In short, what is the driving factor behind it, in your view?
The way we approach it, so there's definitely a business case, but let's park that. The main reason why I think that companies need to go for it, and why at Vopak we go for it, is because it's in line with our values. I mean, and we can ask if there is a business case for any of our values, but we basically believe on those things. They are important for us, and we go for them. And as safety is very important for us, and we can all question if there is or not a business case for this, or transparency is very important for us, okay, diversity, it's also there. Having that said, of course, we see benefits on making our company reflect the societies in which we operate, being able to I would say, fish for talent on a larger pond, and basically reflecting better our customers' diversity and our customers, and understanding the different places where we are. So there is a business case, but again, I think that the primary reason why we should all go for it is because it's the right thing to do.
Okay, so it's more a values-driven thing in your view. We actually do have the results of that question. So on a scale of 1 to 10, what number would you rate the ambition and actions in place in your company to promote gender equality in hiring practices? And the results there are looking pretty good, because obviously 9 and 10 are saying that 40% are saying that their rating would be up at the highest. So obviously it's a very high priority. And then 20% saying, oh, it's maybe a little bit lower down on the scale, but it's obviously doing very well, which is good news, and not going to be surprising to you, Chantal, I think, because you've seen that there is an awful lot of progress amongst all of these companies. If I can bring Chantal back in, having done the research, how difficult is it to actually state the clear business case? You know, there's so much literature out there that actually does also sometimes contradict the fact that certain things are working. Some people feel they're just throwing resources at something that might be sort of a lot of smarm, you know. So what can you say to that?
Yeah,
to
maybe
that skepticism, perhaps.
Yes, maybe coming back to what Anna said today, I fully agree. It should be based on our values, and because it's just the right thing to do, and so on. I do think, though, from my experience, and I've worked with quite a lot of chemical companies on the topic, that the real move, and I can actually also include my own company, is only happening once you have the business case. And that might be the talent you mentioned, Anna, when you say, okay, we actually don't get enough people and we need to tap on, this potential. Or it can be a financial one that you really see in crisis situation, the female leadership skills bringing better decisions because they're maybe more tend towards including everyone, towards building consensus, and to reacting maybe differently to ambiguity. So just from my experience, that business case is important to make that, or to trigger that move.
Thanks very much. And I'm going to come over to you, Jeanne-Marie, because you have vast experience in this field in a number of different sectors before coming into petrochemicals. So how does the progress that you've seen in the chemical industry so far compare to what you've seen elsewhere?
Thank you. Well, yes, I've been at this more years than I'd like to count, well over the 20-year mark. But in many ways, the industries and the sectors all have the same challenges when it comes to DEI, and they're very similar challenges, obviously, that we've been pointing out here. What we've seen here at LyondellBasell is a great focus and increased commitment, especially in the last couple of years, and that has helped us really accelerate. And so I think that that our industry is really primed for a great breakthrough, so to speak, a great acceleration in focusing on DEI, and that really matches well with our millennial and Gen Z kind of data, and what we're hearing is important to them as they start their careers, and as we are dealing with aging workforce in our industry and needing to attract new talent. This is a great opportunity to kind of attract those non-traditional candidates that don't normally come to this industry. But if we can position ourselves as, very strong on the DEI side, which is, again, one of the clear important employment factors of how university graduates, for example, decide on choosing their first employer. As well as sustainability, which is a very much emerging, focus for us too in the industry. Those two areas, I think, will really give us great opportunity to seize and attract a really great non-traditional talent pool.
Okay, so that's definitely good news, because there is progress on all of those fronts as well. Let's go look back at our survey again. I see that our results have changed a little bit from the last time I was citing this last slide. So we're now at a third, but all up in the upper 50%. So that's definitely looking good. The second poll question that we had, we asked the audience to rate the ambition and actions in place in their respective companies to promote gender equality. So let's see what came up there. Possibly we can bring that up. Oh, that is the answer to that, or is that? Wait a minute. Yes, that is the answer. Excuse me. We've got a separate result that I hadn't noticed had come in the same time. So that is the third, and all up in the second half, and looking quite positive. I know that Ingerd, you mentioned, and very obviously in shipping, gender equality is a huge issue in that business. So tell us now some concrete examples of how Eau de Fiel is actually tackling this issue.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the tracking and transparency is key here. How do we measure DE&I? I believe that increased transparency is key when driving progress toward any target, and we are seeing more of this, as the survey also showed. One specific example on our end is an index called the SHE Index. It's powered by Ernst & Young, and our organization in Norway participated in this index for the first time this year. It is an index where you get a score based on many KPIs, and you can measure progress over time. You get a score based on your progress, and you can also see whether you're moving in the right direction compared to peers. I'm optimistic that this will become a good tracker, but it's the early stages of it. And there are also new public reporting requirements that entail some diversity and equality measures, and this will also drive focus and hopefully lead to results. Some specific measures to move toward increased diversity. To your question again, I can share a couple of examples. We use language decoding to make sure that the wording of our ads is not skewed toward one gender. We've adjusted some fields in our applicant tracking system. We split between required and additional preferred qualifications in our job ads to decrease the risk of underrepresented candidates self-selecting out. And we do what we can to ensure that both genders are represented in the interview stages on both sides of the table. And also, I can mention that we bundle recruitment processes when possible, meaning recruiting for more than one job at a time. According to studies, such bundling should increase the likelihood of diverse hiring. So there are many small measures and actions, and hopefully we believe that this will move the needle in the right direction.
That is indeed so interesting. Language washing, language decoding, something that certainly hadn't occurred to me before we started having this discussion. And so interesting that different candidates react very differently to what is there on the page when they're looking. Now, Hanan, over to you, because you've said the industry struggles to attract transformative talent when we were speaking, but your talent pipelines have indeed become stronger. So what have you done to achieve the gains that you've made, and concretely, and how do you manage to change the corporate culture to create this environment for women to thrive, first of all?
We take a three-step approach, which is not, by the way, the formula for success. Neither we have totally solved it. But I would say, again, working a lot on our infrastructure, the places where people come to work, making sure that they are welcoming and suitable for all. We also work a lot in our policies, okay, to make sure that we give the flexibility in our policies for everybody to feel welcome and attracted at Vopak. I think at maternal and parental leave, it's one of the first that we tackled teleworking as many universal maternal. Teleworking, among others, has been another one. Definitely, the second thing was what I mentioned at the beginning, clear measurements, okay? Target setting, around understanding where are your bottlenecks, okay? And thirdly, it's working on your culture, okay? That's the biggest trick of the inclusion part of this equation, which has to do with, again, training spending a lot of time training your leadership, putting this topic on the agenda, understanding where your biases sit, and also making a lot of dialogue moments, surveys, with your employees to understand at the end if these measures are taking effect. So that's I would say the key role, and that's the key place where also the HR side of the organization can impact this journey.
Thanks very much. And because you've mentioned training, I'm going to pull our third survey question in, and that was, do you believe that diversity and inclusion training in your company actually makes a difference? And the overwhelming majority, 75%, said that yes, they do. And that is interesting because, of course, it has sometimes been refuted as being something that could actually be quite, well, first of all, useless and possibly doing more harm than good. Jeanne-Marie, what is your experience with these trainings, and do you ever have to sort of counter resistance to them, and how are you going about measuring impact?
Well, the DEI training specifically is one of our key employee-wide efforts, and especially in this year and going forward. So we think it is really important. However, it's all in how we execute it. It's using sound learning methodologies, adult learning methodologies, and that starts, as you can imagine, with DEI being such a high area of interest. There are a lot of external partners, learning partners to use, and it's about finding those right partners who will help really focus on behavioral change, because that's where you make the biggest traction in learning and investing in learning. So it's unconscious bias training, for example, that is really almost at a kind of a awareness level, probably will not move the needle in terms of changing behavior inside an organization, and we know that. So ensuring that we pick the right kind of learning, the right kind of training. We are, for example, taking a cascaded approach. So our CEO and our executive team were the first who started the DEI training. And it's an immersive effort. So it's short bursts of learning that they get, and they have an opportunity to go back and apply. It's about trying to open up dialogue and conversation. So getting leaders to lead those DEI conversations inside their teams, and in one-on-one conversations, for example. So we've started with the top. We're cascading that through all of our leaders, all of our employees. We're all going through the same, so we have similar language. We have similar conventions about how to have the right kind of productive DEI conversations in the organization. And is also about developing what we call allyship, which is recognizing that regardless of whether you're in an underrepresented group, for example, all of us have a responsibility to foster and nurture an inclusive culture in the organization. So just like safety, we would never let our colleagues be unsafe. We would step in. We are trying to apply that same kind of commitment through our training with belonging and inclusiveness in the organization, that it's all of our responsibilities to help all of our colleagues feel included.
Thanks very much for that, Jeanne-Marie. And Ingrid, I'm going to come over to you, because obviously this question of commitment of management is crucial for any of these D&I strategies to make a lasting impact. And it was interesting to hear about this cascading. How are the different decisional levels actually involved at Odefjell?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and it's so important, right? You're absolutely right. It starts at the top, and our overarching ambitions on DE&I have support from our board, from our executive management, and this is very instrumental. And then from there on, our efforts are embedded into our people practices without necessarily at this point being called out as DEI efforts. I can give some examples. Our people managers at all levels are involved through the decisions they make in recruitment, development, and promotions, as well as how they lead and include their team members from the onboarding phase and onward. So something as easy as or simple as an onboarding checklist that's given to both new hires and managers. These are tailored to drive belonging from the beginning and foster an inclusive work environment for our new hires. If we get to the employee level, every employee is involved through our performance management process, where they can take ownership of their development, but where we have, for example, removed their self-rating in a performance process. We did this to mitigate through system design. For tendencies, studies show that women and some minorities have to self-rate lower than other groups. And then that provides an anchor for the manager in their performance evaluation of the same employee. And obviously, in turn, that could negatively impact promotability and compensation down the road. So those are some examples of specific actions and decisions that are impacted throughout the organization.
That's very interesting. And I'm going to come back over to Jeanne-Marie, because you mentioned obviously involving employees in these changes is also crucial. How do you go about involving them? You've had very good experience with specific employee networks. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. We call them employee networks. I think many companies call them resource groups, but these are employee-led, employee-driven, and we have launched this year 4 specifically new networks. They are global networks, and they are around specific populations, women globally, Blacks, LGBTQ+, and young professionals. And they have each been, leaders of those networks have been selected and chosen, but they develop an agenda, an annual plan, so to speak, that these networks use to try to attract and engage and retain our employees. And for each of those networks, those are open to all employees. In fact, we are encouraging all of our employees to participate in at least one of these networks. If they are not an individual who identifies with that particular group personally, that they are an ally, as I spoke to earlier. And so we think this level of change, where it's really in the employees' hands and they have the opportunity to understand what are the enablers, what are the barriers of this particular group of employees, that they're experiencing, and help us really develop the right kind of, as Ingrid said, the right kind of HR programs, the right kind of support mechanisms, the right kind of leadership support that they need to again, thrive and grow in the organization. It's probably one of our most significant change levers that we think are going to really increase the inclusion level in the organization.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I've got a question that's come in here from our participants, and it is a question for all the speakers. So I'm just going to see who puts their hand up and we can possibly go around the table. And this is again addressing some of this possible skepticism. What needs to be done to engage people on this important topic is the question. Do you think there's a risk that these sentiments now sound like cliches or could seem insincere? I think some people question the fact that it's being quite so highly prioritized when we've got economic woes and all kinds of supply chain woes. How do you respond to that? Perhaps I can come to you, Hanan, first on that.
Yeah, and I would say, I think that at the end, the credibility on any topic would be by what people see. So at the end, either the company across the board, including its leadership, is diverse or it is not. And the rest, I agree that can bring skepticism to people. So we need to focus pretty much on making, I would say, visible leadership, on these actions. That also will, again, help accelerate a lot this transformation. So that would be my take on it. And that's where we need to put a lot of our focus on.
Ingjerd, risk of this sentiment sounding like cliches, seem insincere. Do you have to deal with resistance?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I believe we all do. To come back to the communications piece mentioned by several of the participants here, I think it's important that there is a clear and outspoken focus from the top, highlighting this as a key priority. From there on, though, going back to something that Jeanne-Marie brought up, linking this to safety, how do we become so inclusive that it's just part of our culture? It doesn't need to be called out necessarily in everything we do, more so just embed it into our policies, our programs. and hopefully make an impact and how the culture adopts it, more than always talking about it specifically or explicitly outside of regular business, make it part of it.
Jean-Marie, do you have any comments to make there?
Just briefly add that, you know, it's an opportunity that we have found that, you know, answering the why is a great conversation opener into this topic. So, you know, we can go back to McKinsey and all those other wonderful studies that show, you know, if we are more inclusive, if we are more diverse, we perform better ultimately, and it will help us succeed in the challenges that, you know, that our company is facing going forward. So we have really clear evidence that we can use in those conversations. And what we found in that is that they're very they're compelling, and they really you know, they really kind of answer that bigger why. Then we focus in on the why within the organization, and we talk about where our representation sits right now and where there are opportunities to, you know, advance and women, for example, in our organization, especially in our leadership levels. And that is another compelling reason, you know, that seems to be very convincing internally. But ultimately, it comes down to that personal, you know, am I going to be left out? Is this mean, does DEI, is that for me, or is it for all of us? And I think that's what we are working hard to do, is to ensure that our principles, our focus, it really brings everybody along on this DEI journey. And it's not one group over the other, but it's bringing all of us along, and all of us, you know, succeeding together.
Like Gina mentioned this morning about we can have different opinions, but we all have to discuss solutions together. Chantal, perhaps I'll bring you in on this as well, because you've done so much work in the chemical community, as you said. What are your observations, and how often have you had to deal with this sort of resistance?
Yes, thanks for taking the word. And I would really add to what Jean-Marie said, because I think it's to the point. I think there is quite some resistance, but maybe let me also not talk only about resistance, but also about the opportunity. I think once people try and take the risk and work against these resistances, they suddenly see that bringing in something different can actually expand the horizon, and that everybody can learn something new, and that actually the different strength of different types of people, being it women, men, being it introverts, extroverts, can actually make the whole company better together. And that's totally in line with what Jean-Marie just said.
Thanks very much for just sort of emphasizing that. And Hanan, I'd like to come back over to you, because you've got an incredibly global perspective. As I mentioned in your introduction, you are actually Argentinian. You've lived in 7 different countries. And you mentioned, when we had our preparatory conversations, that the D&I agenda is advancing faster in regions other than Europe. And that might be surprising to some people. Can you tell us why that is, in your opinion, and tell us about your observations?
This is my personal observation. I don't have data to back it up. I think that in large parts of the world, the social welfare network that exists in Europe, it's inexistent. So basically, women join the workforce along with men, not only so both at blue collar and white collar levels. Yeah. And over time, that has had, I would say, the positive side effect, if you want, or not side effect, that basically those companies tend to be pretty gender balanced, okay, across the board. So not only on senior jobs, or not only on junior jobs, but all across, I would say, the talent pipeline. That's what we observe. So that's one difference. Then again, it's also based on my personal observations. I think that women also in other regions of the world have demanded it a little bit more, have been a little bit more boastful, have been a little bit more rebellious towards, I would say, the status quo. And I think that those two forces, both, I would say, the demand for change, and I would say the need to participate, because there were less available alternatives in the labor market, created that situation. So I think that what can happen is that I would say I would encourage everybody, both women and men in Europe, I would say, to be a little bit more active and not only depend, I would say, on legislation to change this for us, but also to actively go for it.
Be pushing forward. And of course, I mean, we've really been concentrating on women, certainly in with reference to your experience, Hanan. But it's not just about women. What about other minorities?
Yeah, I mean, and most probably would be the same with any other group. Definitely, women are not the only, I would say, diversity dimension that a company has. Religious minorities in the countries where that is valid, ethnical minorities, competency groups, mental styles. So there are many ways to look at this. Definitely, I would say, I think that this is a good moment to tackle one of them, which is the gender imbalance, which is an evident one. Okay, half of the world population on one side, not reflected in your company, really. I mean, in the 21st century, I mean, let's change that together. But I think that we need to work, and each business needs to understand where it is all over it in all the other ones. The idea of inclusion is not to replace people. It's not that now there will be jobs for women and not jobs for men. The idea is that there will be more people included there. Definitely, there will be more competition. And that can be scary for the people holding power, because, yeah, if I competed with 10 people and now I compete with 100, oh, maybe I need to train more. But that's, I think it's a welcoming thing for the labor market and for the health-being of companies. Again,
I'd just like to put this issue out there for the other panelists to possibly comment. I know, Jeanne-Marie, you've also got quite some global experience. What can European companies do to catch up on this issue, in your opinion?
Well, I can say, what we have almost half of our employee population based in Europe, and we know that our common and collective focus on gender is universal and global. So that's something that we share in common. But I think what we're doing is trying to understand from our European leaders, from our country level leaders, what are the diversity challenges? And when you are trying to attract and retain talent, where are the diversity needs, the underrepresented groups that you want to optimize? And so we have intentionally defined diversity very broadly for that reason, and really trying to give some empowerment and autonomy to our local leaders to help us identify the needs locally and support them from there. So it's really a mix, and it's a whole, it can be the obvious demographics or generational differences, but it may even be those invisible differences that we really are wanting to focus on, whether they be disabilities or, or diversity of thought. Working parents, for example, may be a particular issue in one locality. So we're trying to get that flexibility to understand locally as well as globally.
Thanks very much for that input. Inyard, does this apply to you at all, or can you speak to that at all? These local specificities that need to be taken into consideration, how to balance that equation within a global company?
Yeah, absolutely, and I appreciate the comments that have been made so far, and see that they apply in our situation as well. I think in the space of gender, we have an imbalance at various levels of the organization throughout our geographic footprint. So it kind of applies throughout. But I very much believe in breaking it down to the individual people managers level, looking at their team. What does your team look like, and where would you have a challenge from a diversity perspective? It could be degree, it could be educational background, it could be any matter of aspects, but to break it down and deal with it or work on it in a more decentralized fashion is absolutely something that can work in parallel with some overarching global ambitions.
Now, Ingrid, we've heard in many of the previous conversations over these 3 days about the issue with talent and obviously securing talent, getting young, fresh talent in. With limited candidates in the pipeline, companies are competing, obviously, for that very limited cohort. Are there also ways that they can collaborate? I know that you're involved in some initiatives. Could you tell us about those?
Absolutely. Yeah, and yes, I think so. I think there are areas where we can collaborate or we can work across industry and across geographic area. So we recognize the need for increased diversity as a industry-wide opportunity and challenge. And so we work with others in the industry. We see that this is both meaningful and valuable. One example is that we encourage our employees, male and female, to become members of WISTA, Women's International Shipping and Trading Association. Another example is that we participate in an industry mentoring program for women in shipping, together with the Norwegian Ship Association, WISTA, and an association called Young Ship. And in this program, Odfjell participates both with mentors, and we also have employees who participate as mentees. In addition to this, we have employees who participate in more local programs here in Norway with students, together with other companies in the maritime cluster in Bergen, Norway. And finally, we work with, we engage, and we support some of or the agenda put forth from the Norwegian Ship Association in terms of how to drive increased diversity in our industry in shipping. So absolutely, there are very many areas where I think that we can work together with other companies and with interest networks and organizations to work together to make sure we are attractive to a more diverse pool of talents than we have been in the past.
Thanks very much for that input. Hanan, can you say anything to that about collaborating on those kinds of efforts?
Yeah, I think that it also involves more than companies. I mean, we need to work with universities. We need to work with business organizations like EPCA. We need to involve definitely, I would say, the education authorities of the countries. There is I would say partially, but ongoing, and I hope that will be successful effort to try to attract more women to STEM careers, to science, technology, mathematics, and I think that that's something that we all need to keep pursuing because it's better for overall for society, and definitely is good for our industry. So that's where I see a little bit the collective effort, that it's not so much a competition, but collaboration.
Thanks very much. Well, that is definitely good to hear that there are collaborative efforts. I have a question here that's directed to all speakers. I'm going to put it to you, Jeanne-Marie, first of all. What specific actions are you taking to make things more accessible for people that are not able-bodied or neurotypical? So looking again at some of these other groups and getting away from just the gender question.
We are very early in that journey. I must acknowledge that we are trying to really understand what are our enablers and barriers today, and what are the specific things that we can do to encourage. In some countries like the United States, there's more legislation that supports this, but we are trying to understand that, and I would just have to acknowledge that we're very early in that process, and can't really speak to something as established at this point, but high on our radar.
Okay, and I'm going to go to the next question, which is for Ingrid. If I understood you correctly, this participant has written in your introduction, you mentioned that D&I is linked to sustainability at your company. So could you elaborate on how you do this at Odfjell?
Yeah, so we work together with our sustainability efforts, the S, the social within the ESG sphere, is where we connect our diversity and inclusion work and targets. So related specifically in terms of tangible targets to improving the gender balance at all of our levels. We're also in the same space, which is not directly related to the DE&I here, but looking at what do we do as a company in the space of human rights. So we look at the DE&I broadly as fitting within the social aspect of the ESG and link this then through our sustainability strategy at Odfjell.
Thanks very much. Now, because the question didn't get asked to you, but we heard from Hernan that COVID has had quite an effect. I just want to, because you're involved in shipping, and I know that shipping has been really hampered by this, I'd just like you to possibly comment on whether that has had any effect on your progress at all.
It's a bit early to say absolutely COVID has impacted us in so many ways, you know, both at sea and on shore. Whether it has made an impact on our DEI efforts, it's too early to see from a KPI standpoint. You know, looking at the macro picture, you read studies and articles and publications about how it is perhaps a setback for women equality, gender equality in the workplace, but I do not have specific tangible feedback on how it's impacted
data
us.
And feedback on that. Yeah, obviously too early to tell with something like that. I do have another question here that's addressed to all of you. Can the focus and action on gender equality create male employee frustration? And if so, how to manage that? Who'd like to take a stab at that? Jean-Marie, you're nodding your head, so I'm going to pull you out of the...
Sure. You know, I think that was what I was alluding to in my earlier comments is it's really, we found it very essential to make DEI, you know, an effort that is not only the recipient for all employees, male, female, whatever diversity demographic you represent or identify with. So, you know, we have some guiding principles that, you know, that DEI is really for all of us, that, you know, it is based on our performance, our qualifications, etc. Those are guiding principles. And I think that is helping clarify the expectations inside our organization around DEI. It's always tricky, and I guess that's what I was meaning about. It comes down to the personal level. Whether you're male or female, you know, are you feeling left out? Are you feeling not, you know, that there's not a fair process for you? Are you feeling a level of belonging? We all experience that. And our aim in our DEI efforts is not to focus on one population over the loss of another. It's about bringing us all together. And so that's, you know, that's kind of the fine point that we're trying to use to perhaps mitigate that feeling of, well, now we're focusing on one population over the other.
Chantal, perhaps you could comment on that because of the long experience that you've had actually examining many of these questions.
There is for sure frustration and maybe a bit of anxiety on how this turns out. But I think that's the approach of taking everyone in is actually very crucial. And actually, we also need to be aware that what we've seen in many chemical companies and also in other companies is diversity and inclusion will go nowhere without the male leading now, right? So we need to get that buy-in, we need to get that understanding, we need to take everybody along. Otherwise, this will not progress and this will not work. And it is taking the worries, anxiety, and concerns of everybody in, of females and how they feel, of other minorities, of why they might not be feeling inclusive, but also of men maybe being afraid of their current roles.
Thanks very much for that. Jeanne-Marie, I'd like to just come over to you for a final question. What advice would you have possibly for companies that are just getting started on this D&I journey? Because of course, not everybody is at the quite advanced level, and even all of your efforts have been quite recent as well. So some of the participants out there are going to be wondering, where do I begin?
Yeah, oh, it's a great question. I think they're, learning from others and really, we can be very clear about what the best practices are. We've talked about them today, that commitment from the top. I always call it the slow down to go fast. So before rushing into, a lot of programs that we don't, we may not know what the impact is, to pause and really try to understand what the specific and unique needs are within your organization, and then develop the right kind of solutions that will make the traction, because that is, we're getting it a lot, and I'm sure that it's a very common, is how do you know we're making progress here? And sometimes the representation might move 1 percentage point or 2 percentage points, but having those clear measures to really track it and share it is a really key piece of that. But it's picking the right kind of actions and programs that you invest in that you think is going to start showing the short-term, mid-term, and long-term wins as well. So those are a couple of my thoughts about what I would advise to others who are just getting started.
Ingjerd, some final words on words of advice to your colleagues out there, or possible words of invitations of collaboration. What would you say to other companies just embarking on this D&I journey in these difficult times, really, as well?
Yeah, well, coming back to some of what we've talked about here today, I think it starts at the top with a strong commitment. I do think that both the inclusive and equality piece, the culture, it takes time, as does moving the needle on diversity. And so I think, yeah, be patient and make systematic efforts, one after another over time. I'm hopeful that that's what will move the needle for us. And I think we need to work at many levels in many fields, and maintaining focus both on the work culture and the environment that we provide, striving to create a culture where everyone feel and experience being equal and feel like they can belong and bring themselves to work, at the same time as we work on the pipeline and increasing the diversity that enter into our company. So, yep, thank you.
So definitely taking a long-term view, a long-term approach to an inclusive culture, and establishing it as a culture change, and seeing D, E, and I, and including that E, of course, so that it's as holistic as possible, as an opportunity, and embedding DEI as deeply as safety is embedded in many of the companies. That was also a very interesting point brought in from Jeanne-Marie in terms of how to view that, but the commitment from leadership being there across the industry. And thanks very much to Chantal for those survey results, which showed that there has been positive improvement, big improvements in recruiting and providing flexible options for women. And of course, now the industry simply needs to move more towards achieving these inclusive environments and providing opportunities for more diverse talents. And many of those groups, obviously very, very difficult to have a lot of the data on what's going on there in these particular times. Thanks again to all of our speakers for this very engaging session. It's one, obviously, where a lot of emotion comes up and when people are not familiar with particular strategies, but it was very interesting to hear some of the strategies that are in place, and sometimes very, very small, very seemingly insignificant things can have and make a huge difference. So good to know that the petrochemical industry is making inroads, and the entire ecosystem making inroads on this challenging issue. And thanks again to Jeanne-Marie Baumann, Ingjerd Nettestad, Hernan Rhein, and Chantal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you, which means